Okay, so now that we have our storefront access token connected, we can basically jump directly over to VS Code. And what I wanted to do while we're here is quickly talk about this general architecture again, and then point out a few things about the server components. So overall, this is what you're going to see when we install a new project. This is what we see. And when you very first come in here, you can see the config files for Tailwind, Vite, server, the file, the README, the package JSONs. The end HTML is here. And what I do like is that most of what we'll be doing and most of the work is done out of the source folder. So I do like that. A couple of things that I don't like or that are not my preference is that Hydrogen comes a little bit strict. The ES linting is fairly strict. For instance, if I come over to a component and open up this welcome dot server, which I'm going to talk about the dot server in a second. So when I open up this, you can see if I just make a line, if I just create more than one space, the linter screams at me. And personally, for me, that's a little too handcuffed for the way I like to write my code. So you open up the source folder and you have your components and your pages folders, your subfolders. And I also like that the app file is outside of the pages file because app file is not a page. So I do like that. Other frameworks, I think Next.js, I'm pretty sure it puts the app file in pages and I prefer outside. So that aside, we mentioned server and client and shared components in a prior video. And one thing I wanted to point out is I will say that at first, this seemed okay to me. This seemed like, okay, I understand what's happening. But when I really dug into it, as I could point out here, is that once we start getting into the rules on server components and shared components, it can start to get a little bit fuzzy. And I do think a better naming convention is one that is described here and commented on here in this discussion. And I will show you what I mean by that because there's so many rules for server and shared components in Hydrogen. Essentially, it does not work the way normal React works. And that's threw me off a little. And I would assume it's going to throw some other people off. So the best way I think to look at it is right now with normal React, the way we know it, without having things be dot server and dot client, as you can see here, there's a new naming convention in Hydrogen with the dot servers and the dot client. And that is the way that Shopify is wanting to currently distinguish, but this is actually up for debate, as I'll show you. And you can actually comment on it yourself currently. So all components right now in React are essentially client components. And it talks about this here. Um, here's the rules, the full rules on the server components and the client components. And essentially, as you can see right here, is client components are standard React components. So that everything you're used to working with React right now, it's all defined here as a client component. And that matters because the way we see it in Hydrogen right now, the non-specific named components that are just JS or JSX, .js or .jsx, these are actually shared components right now, but they don't function the way that we're used to normal components functioning in React. Normal components in React are actually client components. And that can get a little confusing with the way that they've done the convention here, because we might think of that normal React components are the unaltered names, the way we're used to it, but it's not. The way we're used to it is that all components that we're used to are client components. So I actually agree with this person here who mentions that if all components are right now client components, and generally use the JSX extension, it would probably be easier migration path for JS to just be the client component and for .shared and .server to be the new types, because it's just easier to think about it like that. And that's basically what they're saying about the opt-in. And I agree. And in fact, I added my thumbs up here. So, that's without mentioning the rules. Let's go over the rules a little bit. So the rules can get a little specific. General rule for server components, you can only use, they're the ones that are able to use the server only data from databases. Okay. Internal system services and file systems. They can also render other server components or client components. They can't use state. So use state, use reducer is out. They cannot use lifecycle effects. So you can't use a use effect or a layout effect. And they cannot use any custom hooks. Client components are basically exactly what you're used to right now. And shared components have the most restrictions, but they can be used by the client and the server. And Shopify is showing this here. They show it fairly simplistically, but coming from someone who's used to developing in, I guess, quote unquote, normal React or Next.js, let's say, this is different. And Next.js also has get static props and server side props. And so you can tell it which component you want to, the way you want it to render, but this is different than that. And it is a little bit more confusing, and which is why, again, I agree with more of this convention, and this would be my vote here. And this is where to come and vote for that convention if that's what you want to do. So in the next video, since this was a little long, I'm going to go ahead and continue the walkthrough and make the changes, and we'll do a little bit of GraphQL and look at the graphical interface. So I will see you in the next lecture.